Hello everyone. Today I am going to be briefly discussing songs about America. Yes, America, or however you wish to pronounce America. These are the songs that for me sort of stood out as American songs. I've tried to pick ones that are focused in on different things dealing with America. And I find that a lot of the songs that I chose to be rather compelling. Some of them are fairly well known, but I'll kind of try to dissect these songs a little just so people can get an idea of what these songs sort of represent. Now, the first song that I wanted to briefly discuss is something that I'm sure a lot of the music-going community has heard of, and this is called American Pie by Don McLean. Oh yes, this song. Where to begin? This song I found to be fairly elaborate in how it establishes its chorus, its verses, and it seems to be talking about a lot of things. And some of these things aren't necessarily clear. So forgive me, but I'm going to try to see if I can sort of give you an idea of what Don McLean was trying to say in this particular song. But basically, it starts off with him discussing, like, the first lines, a long time ago. And a long time ago is supposed to refer to the 50s songs. And then and then at one point he says, I can make those people dance. He's talking about an era when dancing and music sort of really coincided together, and that you could dance and sort of be in rhythm with the music. And that has to do with the 1950s era because, again, as you know, probably swing being popular as well as other forms of dancing. It seemed like this era was really trying to incorporate dancing with music and songs. So he really is trying to establish this sort of nostalgia, and you kind of see throughout the song that he is sort of wrapped up in this nostalgia that he has. But it still has this kind of sad undertone to it, because as you kind of see when he shifts in tone when he's talking, when he's singing. And what I really like about the song is how it kind of transitions into those eras. Like, it starts with the 1950s and then kind of goes into the 60s, where we see sort of a shift within American culture, as a lot of people will notice with these kinds of songs. And basically, the interesting thing too is the song, even though it can be generalized into however you want to interpret it, there are still some lines though that still have some kind of specific events attached to them. One incident in particular starts with Buddy Holly. And Buddy Holly was a famous musician, and basically Don McLean, I think, was a child or a young kid during the time that that this musician Buddy Holly was killed in a plane accident, and I think it killed two other big music stars. I think it was Big Bopper and Richie Valena, and basically, I guess, in particular, Don McLean sort of, I guess, looked up to Buddy Holly as a musician. And at one point he talks about, too, the fact that that the singer left behind a wife who was pregnant at the time, but then I guess unfortunately miscarried. At least that was according to the research that I found. And he sort of shifts from this kind of nostalgic longing to this kind of sadness, in that something was sort of taken from him when this event occurred. And it was sort of, again, that kind of nostalgia that I guess he had for these kinds of musicians. And basically whenever he says the day the music died, it's sort of referring to, again, those musicians. This sort of, I guess you could make the argument too that it's talking about sort of the era shift, in that not only are these musicians dead, but sort of like an era of America is sort of ending, because as you see, you really don't get the same kind of feel as you did in American culture in the 1950s compared to later on in the later 60s, when we started to have this other cultural movement, sort of the counterculture movement, take over. So again, I think Don McLean wanted to make this song kind of reflect onto that and into this shift. So again, the chorus of this song, the "Bye, bye, Miss American Pie, drove my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry. And good old boys were drinking whiskey and rye and singing, this will be the day that I die, this will be the day that I die." This chorus is very hard to interpret because it can mean a variety of different things. It could be something associated with Don McLean's sort of childhood, again, like when he was talking about Billie Holiday. It could be something a little bit more complex in that it's about maybe the time, I guess, maybe when his nostalgia sort of died, or it could, or the American era that we all knew is now gone, or it could mean a variety of things. It's not really necessarily clear, but it does seem to sort of suggest this kind of shift in feeling and in tone. And then basically the second verse sort of has these religious undertones to it. Don McLean, according to my research, was Catholic, so he liked to put in God and religious symbolism into his songs. So you kind of see that within the second verse. And then in the third verse, we get a sense of him sort of talking about the rock and roll legends. From it could be from the Stones or the Beatles, or a variety of people that sort of came out of the 60s era, once the 50s era sort of passed. There's also reference to the Kennedy assassination, Charles Manson, Janis Joplin, and again he does bring up reference to the fact that this is the kind of music you can't dance to. You can't really dance to rock and roll. Yeah, you can bang your head and kind of move around, but you can't really form you can't really form a cohesive movement to rock and roll. At least back in those days, it wasn't really common to get partners and go and dance. So again, he is sort of referencing again the shift in time, how we've gone from the 1950s and early 1960s into the later 60s, when these things were happening and sort of ultimately changing American culture. I think it could be interpreted in a variety of ways as to whether Don McLean feels like that this change in era is sort of a bummer for him personally or not. It's almost hard to tell, because there are certain points where he almost feels like it almost feels like he would rather go back to that 50s era. He would want to go back to his nostalgia, back when his rock musicians that he looked up to so much, were alive. And it seems like that he kind of is unsure about this kind of change that America is going through. and there's sort of like this kind of discomfort and loss for him because of the fact that things aren't the way they are now. So again, it's kind of referencing those kinds of feelings, and I think a lot of people probably felt a similar way in that times were changing, and America was a country that sort of symbolizes that, and how Don McLean wants to sort of bring out the kind of differences and the changes that took place within this time period within American history that were rather profound and are really marked upon in America in general. So for the most part, I think it's a really good song in that it is a little hard to interpret, it's a little hard to figure out at times, but there is a lot of stuff in it, a lot of it dealing with history, and I think it's a time within American history that's rather interesting, and I like how the chorus is something sort of more loose in interpretation, and that it's not exactly clear as to what Don McLean really intended, but I think he was trying to emphasize this whole point of change. Now this change can affect people fairly profoundly and within a country. So, and this country happens to be America, so it's a song that I think works. It's a fairly long song compared to other songs that we might see today, but for the most part it handles itself well and tries to show people these kinds of changes and those emotions that come out of those changes. So I think that's really all I can say about that song in general. Now the next one I'm going to talk about is a fairly different song in that it's rather upbeat, and it's called R.O.C.K in the U.S.A. by Don Mellencamp, and I like this song because again it has this kind of upbeat attitude to it, and the interesting thing too is that it's not necessarily about what somebody would think it's about, but basically the song is intended to focus on people who sort of left their normal life in order to sort of fulfill that American dream of becoming a famous or becoming a rock star. So you'll see how he references people and sort of talks about, you know, they're rocking in the USA, sort of to emphasize that that a lot of American culture has to deal with this whole idea of having fame and fortune and something better within life. So it handles itself in a fairly interesting way in that it's so like just upbeat and happy and yeah, America. But I don't think it's overly patriotic. I'm sure some people can interpret it that way because of how the singer sings, but I don't think it was intended to be that way. I think it was just intended to say, yeah, this is just to be kind of this is America, and we're happy to have this opportunity and to rock in the USA. Basically, it's supposed to be more upbeat, and I don't think it's intended to come off as arrogant as it is supposed to be out of a more genuine pride rather than a self-glorifying pride. So but again, I'm sure there are people who can interpret it either way, but I'm not one of those people who listens to the song and suddenly thinks of American flags and thinks of fireworks or something, and starts to get all overly emotional. No, this is just a song that, you know, makes me feel upbeat and makes me feel happy to be in the U.S. And have these kinds of opportunities. So again, it's not really, I think, intended to try to, look down on everybody else, but it's trying to tell you how ordinary people can do extraordinary things in such a place as the United States. So that's all it's trying to say for the most part. Now the next song I'm going to talk about is actually kind of a little bit in the opposite direction of the previous song. And basically it's called American Girl by Tom Petty, and it has a fairly different attitude when it comes to dreams and such. And it's about, in particular, an American girl who is trying to find herself, but she always ends up finding that no matter how hard she tries to reach for something, nothing comes back to her. And I find this to be a fairly interesting take into the way we perceive, I guess not the United States more as a country, but as to the kinds of people that are from America, basically. R.O.C.K and the U.S.A. sort of trying to emphasize the idea of people being able to come out and do cool things. And Tom Petty's American Girl is more about how there are some people who ultimately are left behind and don't get to ultimately achieve maybe the American dream. And I think that says something powerful, and that just because it's the United States, it doesn't mean that everything is perfect. It's not even close. But it's intended to be discussing more of how people sometimes will look at those within American society who've been able to achieve fame or fortune, and realize that they never become all that influential, all that wealthy. And having that realization, I think, brings home this fairly interesting concept, in that, we can try to emphasize the American dream as much as we can, but ultimately it's not going to work into everybody's favor all the time, and sometimes we have to learn as to what we can get out of the circumstances that we have. And so I think it goes beyond, America is just a country. As it's about, America is not just a country, it's about people. And sometimes people can have good luck, and there's others that are not so lucky, and who maybe want to have something more out of their lives, and feel like that the American dream can provide that. And sometimes it ultimately doesn't for everybody. So it is trying to, I think, point that out, and I think that's interesting how it's completely the opposite of R.O.C.K and the U.S.A. So whichever one you prefer, I'm totally open, but I like both, in that they try to kind of show you both sides of the sort of American equation. So there's that. The next song that I wanted to briefly discuss is by Simon and Garfunkel, and it's called America. Just America. And the narrator in the song seems to be searching for America. It seems like he wants to find something more out of life. Again, sort of similar to R.O.C.K and the U.S.A. and American Girl. There's these people who want to try to find something, and find sort of meaning in their lives. And at the same time, the narrator in the song is trying to sort of find America. His lover is living back somewhere else, And again, the song doesn't really make this clear, but if you look at it fairly closely, you'll kind of notice how there's two people living sort of separate lives, and this one, and the other person is basically living a fairly ordinary life. She's reading a magazine, at one point it says, and then she's sleeping. She's doing normal, everyday things, and trying to just live in a normal life. And the narrator of the song is sort of trying to find America's, like he's going to find America. He's searching for sort of this greater meaning, and it kind of gives this sort of awe in the song. It's a little bit light at times, and at times very like awe-inspiring, I'd say, because especially when he's talking about I've gone to look for America, it's a lot different than when he's maybe saying a verse about something where it's either fairly smooth and delicate. So again, it's I think an interesting song in that it kind of sort of seems to have this kind of mix, like R.O.C.K in the U.S.A. and American Girl, and that it mixes this kind of happiness that America brings to people, while at the same time being this kind of song that still sort of emphasizes that the journey is kind of not over. He's still kind of searching for something. It almost seems like it's almost like he's trying to find something. It's almost like he's in America, but he still hasn't really found what he's looking for. And it doesn't, sometimes at some points it doesn't seem real to him. So it's again, I think, providing a little bit of the mixture of between the two previous songs that I mentioned, and that it's upbeat, but at the same time it's still not fully, it's an American dream that's not really fully realized. And I think that's interesting because I think that the American dream is just a dream. It's not really a reality. It's kind of like, if you take a quote from George Carlin, he said, that's why they call it the American dream, because you have to be asleep to believe it. So really it's trying to, I think, show that there is this kind of dreamlike aspect to America, but at the same time it's not really maybe fully a part of reality. So I think there is this kind of emphasis in the song and the way it sounds too. But I think ultimately that's all I can say about that song. Now the last one that I wanted to briefly talk about is Born in the U.S.A. by Bruce Springsteen. And the funny thing is that this song, I think, gets fairly misinterpreted because of this really like Born in the USA emphasis, chorus, and like, yeah, I was born in the USA. Ooh, people really, I think, misinterpret this song. And literally when I was little, I thought it was supposed to be this overly patriotic American flag waving song, but then I realized that actually it's not all that it seems. If you listen to the verses, it's really intended to be an anti-Vietnam song. Bruce Springsteen, I think, apparently had a lot of people that he knew, in particular friends who served in Vietnam. Some who I guess ended up being veterans. I think maybe some others did not make it home. But he sort of discusses like the working class too, and how they're just some average person trying to make their way through life, and then they have to be sent off to Vietnam. So it's trying to be this kind of sort of sort of a, I think it's intended to be kind of a wake-up call to people, in that it's trying to show you kind of the bittersweetness of American history, and that, yeah, I was born in the USA, I was born to live a normal life, but then this war happens, and then I have to be sent off and away. So again, I think it is trying to throw in this kind of political message that a lot of people had during this time. And the odd thing is this song was written like in the 80s, so I find it odd that it's still talking about the Vietnam War. But it does seem that Bruce, I think, intended people to look at this song through a more, I guess, I don't want to say angry standpoint, but or to be mad at the U.S., but sort of like a maybe more of a wake-up call to people. I think when you hear him say "born in the USA," it does sound very like, it sounds a little bit more angry now that I actually hear the verses. It does sound a little bit more like he's trying to be like, born in the USA, you know, like sort of like, yeah, I was born in the USA, and it's I don't think it's trying to be anti-American necessarily, but I think it's trying to point out an era of American history where people were fairly skeptical of the U.S., probably its government too. I think there is this emphasis too within the United States especially that people are rather suspicious of the U.S. government and what it does, and the fact that, you know, Bruce Springsteen says, I was born in the USA, he's sort of saying that, you know, I was born in this place, but this is kind of like what America gave back to, I guess, to me, in that my friends had to go off and serve a war that a lot of people felt was unnecessary during the time. So it is rather odd. I do still like the song. Again, I kind of understand that there are probably people who will be turned off by this song by actually kind of knowing what it actually means. But for the most part, I think it expresses itself fairly well, and it's rather unique. Usually when people think of American songs, they think of, you know, Star Spangled Banner, where it's like this big American flag and we have fireworks and, yeah, we say how awesome we are. But I like these songs that I chose because they kind of show a different side of the United States, and that it's not all flags and Pledge of Allegiances and stuff. There's other interlying cultural phenomenons within the United States, even though we have a fairly short history as a country, only like 200 years of history, but still fairly interesting 200 years of that. But really, for the most part, a lot of these songs, whether they're emphasizing social change like American Pie, sort of trying to create this sense of wonder and happiness, and trying to find your way within the United States, like R.O.C.K. and the U.S.A. kind of does, to the sort of harsh realities that some Americans face, like how Tom Petty points out in American Girl, to Simon and Garfunkel's song Amurica, which is a little bit more of a mix again of sort of fulfilling that American dream, but not maybe having it fully be realized. And then having Born in the USA, which is sort of a song that's intended to evoke kind of the emotions of people, and maybe get actually people to sort of take the country back, like, like, this is not what America's supposed to be. Like, yeah, I was born in the USA. Like, this is not how it's supposed to be. So I think you can interpret it from that standpoint, that Bruce Springsteen's trying to say, I was born in the USA. Like, what is that? That shouldn't be happening in the United States. We shouldn't be sending out people to die and, going to war and such. So that's really, I think what he's ultimately trying to say is just sort of like, it's a way of trying to grab people to sort of change the way things are, or the way things were, or look back on the things that happen. So, and sort of realize what America ultimately means. So, again, it's kind of trying to be that sort of song, but ultimately I think that's really all I can say about all of these songs for the most part. They're all rather unique, I think, in how they address the United States and how they talk about certain aspects of America or American culture or just people who happen to live in the United States. So I think they're all worth checking out and worth listening to, but if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But until next time, everybody.